Morning.
Good morning, Vietnam.
Morning, Vietnam. I have a question I've been pondering. If you guys want to hear it,
Sure.
I listened to it's the newest Art of Manliness podcast, and I don't know who the guy is. I can't remember his name, but it's all he's done these studies on the notion of how power corrupts, and it's pretty interesting. I don't know if I buy into like everything that he says in it, but he's just kind of looked at over the course of many years, like with corrupt power systems, is it a certain type of person that's attracted to it? So that's why you kind of have this self fulfilling prophecy in it. Is it that power itself corrupts people? Um,
What
yeah,
was the
it's
first option again? Sorry.
like, um, is it a certain type of person that is
Mm,
attracted to power? So is it like, is that more the issue of like, no, people that seek power already have these like tendencies in them? Or is it just that like power itself corrupts? And he had some pretty interesting, just takes on it of like, even in modern political systems of like, it's very hard to, very basically speaking, it's very hard to get the type of person that you want to run for political office to run for political office.
right.
And so there's very complex of like what's causal, what's corollary, in this. But I mean, it's a pretty massive study that he does. Anyway, there was one specific point that he was talking about that really intrigued me. And he was saying that, at least according to this whatever study he was citing, like one of the worst things for a person, both like physically and mentally, is to have a place of authority or like a title of authority with very little control.
Hmm.
And so he said, like, if you, and I can't remember some of the examples he used, but he was like an extreme example of that would be like, the CEO of an airline during the height of the COVID pandemic. He said that's like a place of like big authority. And in those times, like very little control. So you can see like how bad that would be on like a person's like stress level and all that. But he said, interestingly, like if you look at someone who's like doing a startup or something like that, both has authority and control, and those people will oftentimes thrive like in those times.
Hmm.
So it's very broad, but I was just intrigued by that notion of, I've never thought about the distinction of authority and control. And it made me think of, I preached on Jesus raising Lazarus this past weekend because we used the RCAA readings from year A. And there's very clear like authority in Jesus in those moments. Um, and I always kind of read that as he was like very much in control of the situation as well. But I don't know. So I not to just dive right in there, but we're on a time crunch, and I
Hmm.
was like, man, does that make any sense? Have you guys ever thought about that, of that notion of like how those two are related, of like the authority a person has and the control that they might have of situations?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I ever thought about it that clearly, like separating those two things, which are oftentimes combined together.
Right.
But but then applying it to the Lazarus story, which I did the woman caught in adultery on Sunday,
Mm-hmm.
but then we are doing our scrutinies on, it's like a Wednesday evening.
Mm-hmm.
So we did Lazarus last night, and both of those readings, that's authority and control as well. I think
Right.
you could make that same the same study in those gospels, but they are so good.
They are, man.
Those readings are unbelievable. They've kind of blown me away recently, but So you're saying that Jesus is in a place of authority, but he doesn't actually have that much control. Is that what you're saying?
That's my question. I was trying to think of other examples because in the Lazarus story, I read it very much as he is totally in control of the situation. Like even the line that, and this has struck me before, but the fact that he hears that Lazarus is sick and he remains where he was for 2 days. Like there's this very much that just to me always kind of sets the scene of like he is not being dictated to in this, like in this situation.
I guess I disagree. I don't think control is a good word for what Jesus is in that moment. I would prefer the word confidence, just because like the whole context of everything, especially in John, is I don't do anything on my own. I only do what the Father I see the Father doing. So I wouldn't say that he's got like this big picture. And that's not how I've ever read the Lazarus story or Woman Caught in Adultery, that he's got some big plan that he's orchestrating, but rather he's simply responding to a higher authority, his Father, which gives him authority. And that's where we get our authority, is in Jesus and his name. And but control, yeah, I think control is the bad version of authority. It's when you actually don't have authority. You need to control people, manipulate them, etc. Do you know what I mean?
I think so. And that is kind of where I wanted this to go in a way, because there's like in this, we're reading through John so much, and there's just this like emphasis on the dependence on the Father there constantly. So I agree that there is like a tension there. So maybe it's just the proper words used, but I would not always associate control negatively, though.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah.
That Connor, it sounds like you're using it in kind of a pretty negative light.
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, to me, it seems like in heaven you get all the joy and everything you desire, but no control. Control is kind of poisonous. That's how I read it. You know, like I'm thinking of Perelandra, the C.S. Lewis space book, where they're not allowed to stay a night on the prelapsarian planet Venus.
Oh yeah, I love it.
They have to live on the floating islands. They don't get to ever stay. They get to go on the fixed land, but they never are to stay a night on the fixed land. They have to sleep on the floating islands where they're fed.
Yeah,
and
they can't store stuff and provide for themselves. Yeah.
So I think possessiveness, or the Corbon book that I'm teaching with the seminarians, talks about holiness is, you know, participating in God's life, which is wholly about the other, WHOLLY. That like what makes the Trinity perfect, and us and our participation in it requires our death, because we have to like totally let go of any attachment to self, which again, maybe there's another meaning of control besides I, the ego, am controlling, so to speak, my environment, other people, and I'm not in this totally free, trusting confidence of the lover and the beloved. Maybe there's another meaning that's just more practical, or whatever, like the CEO in the pandemic situation. You know, that's a bad kind of lack of control. You're out of control, you know, meaning you can't count on tomorrow or the next minute of like what's going to be in the future. So you can't plan anything. But I think in the Christian lens, like we're never in control. Nothing is up to us, and the future is never guaranteed. So the option is either live in the illusion of control, and then you're just always subject to having the rug pulled up from underneath you, and realizing like, oh man, I relied on myself and I am totally powerless. Or like Jesus in the Lazarus story, living into this authority that comes from the fact that I am not in charge of my life. I am not in charge of any of this, that there's one whose wisdom and power and love governs all things, and I am his viceroy. I am his emissary. You know, even Jesus's prayer before the tomb, like I know you're going to do this, Lord, Father, but I'm just saying this for their benefit, like that whole thing is just, I trust you. So I always pictured him waiting where is he, in Jerusalem or something, before he goes to Bethany, as like, it's not, he has some plan of like, okay, I'm going to wait until he dies so that I can go raise him, even though he kind of says this is for his glory, this is for the glory. But rather he can only go when he hears his Father call him,
What about like, Mike, you got anything? I have something that might take in another direction.
Well, I mean, I do think that I'm trying to think of like, is control finally categorized as good and evil? Where it's, if you're controlling things, then there's a type of unreality or manipulation that's present there. That's always driven by the ego. And I think if you go down to the heart of it, it's, in a lot of situations it's true, but I think there's also, like the virtue of self-control or self-possession is actually essential in order to make a gift of yourself, in order to love. And so it seems like there are certain things that the Lord places under our dominion to be good stewards of, which we've talked about before, so that we can control them, and maybe that's not the best word, but possess it in the Christian sense, so that then we can give it away. But I wonder if you don't have the heart of it, the core of that, like the first step of it, then other control that stems from authority, that where you control other people or even a community or like a nation or something like that, that's where it can get disordered, is if you don't have the essential thing right. But I don't know, like I think of a guy like JP2, he certainly didn't control people, but you can control and make decisions that control like governing bodies or institutions and things like that. And I think doing that wisely is using that authority. But I don't know. I don't know about what it would look like to the Lazarus story. It's a good question, man.
And I would say, and I don't want to belabor the point, but I would guess if you asked JP2 in his life on earth, if he felt in control of the institutions of the church, of the communist governments that he was, going up against, I would guess he would say no.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, he appears in control of himself. Yeah, the self-possession. Like I think that iconic scene in Poland when he went his first visit as Pope, and he's completely calm as the people are chanting, "We want God," and the communists, beside him are shaking in their boots because they realize like their control, what they perceived as control of these people, is completely fake. It means nothing. Human beings can't be controlled. I mean, they can be imprisoned and they can be coerced, but there is in principle that the human freedom is never abolished. Even by our own sin, we're always free by God's grace. And that's the thing, is like God never controls. His love is always serene. It's always chaste. It's always non-possessive. Even though we might want it to be. Like, God, control the situation, control me, control the people I love so that this all works out. And yet he just never does that, because freedom is such a high value, because you can't love without freedom.
I'm thinking of the scene in Band of Brothers. You guys have seen that, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I can't remember, I think it's in the episode Breaking Point, we may have even talked about this like scene before, but it's when the one guy, is it Lieutenant Dyke, maybe, like freaks out in combat,
Oh yeah, the guy that
and
stinks.
they send, like in the middle of it, they send spears in,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just like immediate, like, okay, here's what we need to do. This, you do this, you do this, you do this. And it is welcomed in that moment. And so I don't know, maybe you would call that something, but there's like, I don't know, there's still something there of, it wasn't just the authority like of a title, because they had that before. And there was someone that had the capacity then. And I don't want to just split hairs on words, but they're like, in that scene, there was this moment of like, they needed a leader to like help control that situation, even though it's combat, like even though it's not like in complete control there, but there's like an ordering principle that I think is very good there. And I will also admit too of, I mean, we maybe alluded to this last time, but I would, I kind of shade towards, I think, like, it's like, yes, I want to control everything so I can have the right whiskeys for Christmas and things like that, And but there is, do you guys know, I don't know if that scene hits anything there, but like that was, I'm just trying to think of an instance of like, I don't know, that was a little bit different than just authority over a situation. That
Yeah,
was
and
good.
I would say I agree. We have talked about that that situation before, and I think that's confidence again. That's the word I would prefer over control. And I don't know what the roots of control are. I'd be curious to hear what troll means, besides a guy under a bridge taking your troll.
Or a guy on the internet.
But confidence, fide, means faith. So there's trust. Both this guy has confidence, meaning he trusts himself. To the Lieutenant Dyke, he doesn't trust himself. He can't. That's the main problem he has. Is not that he's like out of control. He doesn't control the troops. Is that he has no confidence. He has no trust in himself to like lead. Whereas Spears immediately he's ready, and he trusts himself. He trusts the men.
Were you going to say takes control? Were you going to say that there? No, I'm kidding. Yeah.
No, I don't know.
Sorry to
I don't
interrupt you.
remember. He trusts the men to do the job, and that's partly why they respond. Is like, okay, he has this confidence. He knows what he's doing. And he has like, I mean, he's told us like what to do, and which means he trusts us. He's not there like micromanaging or controlling them. He is ennobling them and lifting them up and leading them. And there's a governance to it. There is like orders and hierarchy and commands. All of that. That's authority. But I guess when it comes to like the JP2 example, I don't know if this is actually true, but I'm starting to think like all authority is kind of moral authority, like soft authority. It's not hard power necessarily. Like that is control. So say like in Russia right now, you're not allowed to say anything bad about the war. Why do they need to control their people so much? Because they have no moral authority. If like somebody saying something on TV or holding a sign out in a street threatens your whole system because it could lead to, the ousting of people from power and, a change of regime or an end to some, political thing, that means you have no authority. You only have power and control. Whereas in a system where you have the moral authority, like people can criticize you, people can question you, because you have their confidence, that you are an actual leader. Your title adequates to like who you actually are for us. You're not using us. You're not controlling us. So does that make sense? I think the Spears thing shows in a way like somebody coming in and controlling them would not have, although, like maybe colloquially we say he's in control of the situation, but in a way like it's the opposite. It's the exception that proves the rule. He's absolutely out of control. It's a completely chaotic situation, but it's that confidence. Same with Lazarus. How could you be less in control than this dude is rotting in his grave? You know?
Yeah. I think, we may just be at loggerheads with the
Mm.
words of like, you say control, I say manipulation. So we'd have to have Mike settle it here.
Yeah, and you say control and you say confidence. But I know, I feel like we're missing something about control. And I can't really put my finger on it, but yeah, I don't really know. I mean, even thinking at the woman caught in adultery there, like Jesus is not in control of the crowds. He's not in control of that woman, but he is in control of himself and is totally in confidence with the Father. So maybe we're just like juxtaposing things that ought not be juxtaposed, but then as a result, like God's presence enters into the crowd, which is mediated through Christ because he is totally in control of himself by being in relationship with the Father, that unbelievably dissipates the crowd. Like that's the most unbelievable one-liner of all time. I don't understand why it was so dang effective. Why is that line so effective? Let he who casts the first stone,
Let he
who is without sin cast the first stone. And I mean, that was a part of what I preached on, but I think it does move from that group control, like let's control this situation, mob mentality, hive mindset type deal. And that question is a personal question. So it does get placed on the individual. So maybe I would say that maybe control on an individual level is correct, but then control on,
What do you mean?
where it would be like each individual is called to have an element of self-possession, an element.
So yeah, self-control.
Yeah. I'm still not so big on this word here. Right.
I read that situation in the woman caught in adultery, that it sets it up. They tried to trap Jesus. They're trying to bottle him up. They're trying to box him in, which is a species of control. And he's uncontrollable. He's totally free. He's sovereign, but not in the way that he's going to fight them and try to control them back. And that's why that line is kind of like unassuming. It's not a big gotcha thing. It kind of is, but sort of like the render to Caesar. It's not. I don't think that it's the line so much that dissipates the crowd, but they realize that that they can't control this guy. They put him in a situation where he can't possibly win, and yet he does. It's like walking through the crowd in Nazareth when they try to throw him off the brow of the hill. It's just a mystery that he no one takes my life from me. I lay it down freely and I'll take it up again. Why all this time they're trying to kill him, they're trying to arrest him, they're trying to undermine him in the view of the public, and yet he's completely free. And then finally they get him on Good Friday, but it's not like that he's determined by the politics of the Pharisees and Pilate, or the pettiness of the crowd and the jealousy of the priests and stuff. Like, none of that actually killed him. He chose to die.
Yeah, and I do. I was thinking of, you've talked about this before, Bisk? Is it Hildebrand's thing of like every act of Jesus is authentic? Is that the right language? And I think that's really good and really important. So even back to like the Lazarus story of like him waiting 2 days is not like for show. I mean, I mean, that's 100. Yeah, absolutely with that. But I don't know. There is, and yeah, maybe it's just kind of splitting hairs on words, but there's this just like ordering presence like with Jesus in these moments. And it's hard to like just pin down of like, yeah, why would that line like have the effect that it does, and the woman caught in adultery, or it's certainly moral authority, but I mean, I think it's way bigger than that too. It's similar to that, like, whoa, dad's here.
Yeah. And she can't control, like the other thing I've noticed about that story is go and sin no more. People try to use this story to prove their point, both sides. Like we want to cast stones at people, and look, Jesus says, go and sin no more. Or we don't want anyone to tell us anything hard about our choices. Look, he says, he who's without sin, cast the first stone. But like neither way is he usable. That's what I preached on last weekend, is that Jesus is totally free. He's like, he completely, he speaks with authority into everybody's life, in that crowd, in that woman's life. And that's what sets them free. Like they can either receive it and change, or they can, refuse to obey his authority, but they cannot control him. You cannot use Jesus, which is frustrating, I think. But yeah, dude.
He's not a grace slot machine, okay, people? All right, you don't just
pull the lever.
Yeah.
The word I'm thinking of, like, is not, maybe this doesn't line up, but control. Maybe like what we're talking about is this order, this lack of chaos, which is cosmos, like the cosmic ordering of everything, the way that God orders it in his freedom, like through his word. It's not, Barron talks about the non-competitive thing. It's not like the Greek gods creating or manipulating by violence or by fear, but God always speaks us into being out of love. And so, but there's an order to that, and sin and possessiveness and egotism and lies like create disunity, disorder, chaos. But when the word made flesh comes in person, he just is cosmic. He's putting things back in order, which is like, that allows us to rest, which feels a little bit like we have this confidence. But our only response as sinners to chaos is control. In our personal lives, in the lives of our parishes or our countries or the world. It's like, how do you respond to evil? Is you just control it. You hem it in, you imprison it. But Jesus doesn't do that. He comes in and he sets us free from the thing that's causing the chaos.
Well, so I don't know. Dang it, I know we need to go, but I don't know if I would say that the only response to chaos as a sinner is control. I mean, I think that it's the grasping. It's the grasping at control. But there are elements to some extent that, at least temporarily, we are placed in control of, and being good stewards of that, I don't think is a bad thing. And maybe control is not the right word, but I think when you grasp at things that are beyond your control, then you get in trouble. But then when you're stewards of the good things that have been given to you, that's when you cooperate in the non-competitive way with the grace of God that's present there. Because even there, it's not you or God, but that it's this cooperation and freedom with the confidence that comes from being with the Father that allows you to control whatever's been given to you. Because in the same way, it's like, I don't think families are temporarily given to people. Like, even the gifts from God, those are authentic. So they're authentically, he wants us to have them, and thereby like be good stewards of them and to control them well, not in a manipulative sense, but I think in freedom.
I'll die on this hill. I know we got it.
Yes.
I don't think God gives you your family to control at all.
Not to control
you can't
your
frame
family
it like that. Yeah,
that
like,
is not.
what did you
okay,
mean?
guys, gotta go.
What did
Well,
you
I
mean?
guess, yeah. If you're saying like, yeah, like everybody's just a bad person and wants to, do this, then yeah.
Well, what did you mean then?
Come on.
I meant being a good father.
Gotta go. Let's leave it at Loggerheads. Let's leave it at Loggerheads. Okay. Gotta go.
All right. That's it.